quick opening. So those that were not familiar with Meta Commercialization Institute, that's an initiative under 8400 that puts itself as an objective to help Israeli technology companies, specifically medtech companies and digital health companies, to plan and, if possible, execute for commercialization. We're doing it through thinking on two things. One is standardized 15-element modules to evaluate and think about medtech commercialization, specifically in the US. And what's new is series of education and case studies that we will try to do at least monthly, if not more often, that give examples and put content into those type of thinking. So that's what we will do today. And I'm happy to introduce our first webinar or Zoominar or whatever minar we want to call it, Jeff Schmidt. I know Jeff for over 20 years. We start working together at Biosense Webster in sales, both in the US. And Jeff, I've seen Jeff growing as a sales and marketing professional to an executive at Biosense, and then together at Itamar. And today, Jeff runs US global, so the entire US sales and marketing for Itamar Medical Zoll or Zoll Itamar, which operates in the sleep apnea space, selling to cardiology. So very unique value proposition. So with his experience, we asked him to cover our first topic, which is thinking about how to go to market from a Salesforce perspective, and in particular, direct sales versus distribution, pro and cons. And then if you decide on one of them, what to do and don't. So without further notice, Mr. Schmidt.
Well, thank you, Gilad, and good afternoon, everyone. Certainly wish I was enjoying the 70-degree weather in Israel, but I'm currently living in Wisconsin in the United States. So I'm looking at about 6 inches of snow outside. So I appreciate everybody's time. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be able to share what I've experienced and learned over my 20 plus years in med device. And more recently, leading the sales organization at Itamar Medical over the last 6 years. During that time, we're able to take a premium medical grade diagnostic sleep device from low single-digit market share to the market leader. We certainly went through our own trials and tribulations, as Gilad will attest to, and we made mistakes, and we've pivoted to turn those mistakes into successes. And we were rewarded by successfully being acquired by Zoll Medical, a multi-billion-dollar cardiology company, which fit right within our strategy that we have been driving for almost 10 years. And it's my hope that in the short time we have together that I'll be able to prompt you guys to think about how you approach building a sales organization in the US, either for a new product or one that's already been established outside of the US. I think what makes sense in the short amount of time we have is to maybe hold your questions till the end. And then, if you have something that you want to ask, you could also add it to the chat box. And I believe that Hannah will be managing that. So Hannah, why don't we move on to the first slide? So why don't we start taking a look at the two different types of sales models? The first is a distributor. A distributor, for those of you who don't know, in the US is a sales team that's been established. They have a presence in the market. They're trusted by their local customers, and they already advertise their brand and that value it offers. These distributors come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, depending on the product types and geographies that they're located. And they can be either a very, very large national brand, or they can also be regional groups, each with their advantages and disadvantages. And we'll start with the pros for utilizing a distributor. So sales expertise within the medical discipline is probably the first and most important. These are highly trained sales reps that have spent many years in their corner of the med device world. And some are experts in surgical selling scenarios. Some are experts in diagnostic space. Some of them are experts on selling a service, and whatever else is available in the med device or tech space. And this is important because you get that experience in the field from day one. Number two would be built-in relationships in the market, and these two kind of go hand in hand. These are going to be very tenured reps. They've worked in a particular geography for years. Many of them are regional distributors, were started by successful reps in a certain geography, and then they go and they would recruit their friends, or they would recruit competitive reps that they knew were good in that same geography in order to create that distributor, and then they would grow from there. They would go after very specific reps that called on particular health systems and key opinion leaders so that they would have an organization that has relationships and breadth across a wide geographical area. This ultimately would allow for great scalability because all they would have to do is go find the next rep in the next town over and then bring them into distributorship. And how they would do that is with compensation. In the US, distributor reps are very well compensated for their experience and the time that they've had in the space. So to build a distributorship, you really have to be front forward with your compensation plan. And then the last pro for a distributor to me is the wide reach. You have the ability to use several different regional distributors as a manufacturer to help sell a portfolio of products across the country. So you could have 3 or 4 different regional distributors that you're working with, or one large national, and that gives you immediate scalability to go wherever you need to go in the geography. Next slide. So now let's look at some of the larger cons in utilizing the distributor. One of the biggest concerns, especially for me, that when we looked at this situation, can be that you have limited control of the representatives, we'll call it mind share or time, and how they market your product. It's not always easy to find a partner who shares the same policy for quality and price. A typical example is a distributor with, let's say, complementary products that are not at the same price point as yours, and you have a higher clinical value. In a way, this turns your product into a commodity to that manufacturer's reps. And what that's going to do is they're going to go sell the easiest product at the cheapest price to their customers. And whatever makes them the most money is what they're going to go after. So one way you can try to defend against this occurring is to build a really strong comp plan for the amount of time and energy they spend on your plan. One example that I have around this issue isn't about hiring a particular distributor, but I think it illustrates the problem. And that is working with another organization or having a co-marketing agreement. When I first came on board at Itamar, we had signed a co-marketing agreement with Medtronic. And we thought, okay, because this is Medtronic, this is going to be a slam dunk. This is, we immediately signed this agreement and everything's going to be great. This is one of the largest and most well-respected organizations in med device. And what we quickly learned was that if we didn't have the mind share of those sales reps, we didn't have the compensation worked in, and they weren't held accountable to meet targets or goals, then it was going to fail. And even as exceptional as their sales team is for their own products, we found that not having the mind share or having their skin in the game led to a failure in that co-marketing agreement. So that's an example of how ensuring that somebody who's working with you, collaborating, or as a distributor, you need to have their mind share on your product. Another con can be the quality and pricing strategies are not aligned in your organization's strategy. So one example of this is if your product is premium priced, it could be very difficult for a distributor who has a lower cost complementary product to promote it properly to your customers. And this usually leads to either no sales or sales of your product, but you lose your premium position. And last is a big one for me, is lack of transparency. The distributor will want to keep everything confidential as much as possible because in part, it's their power in the relationship with the manufacturer, because the distributor's market knowledge with pricing and competitors, customer base is their way to keep long-term development with that manufacturer and that business relationship. So you can wind up in a way being a prisoner to that distributor. So it's very hard for companies to transition from a distributor sales team to a direct. So if you start with distributor and you want to move to direct, it's very tough. A very expensive example of this was many, many years ago, I worked in the CRM or pacemaker and defibrillator space. And there was a sales representative who worked for a distributor who was paid $1 million on contract for 12 months just to not sell in that market for a year so that they could then pull him into a direct role and continue to sell. So in order to pull somebody away from the distributor, it can be very complicated and very difficult. Next slide. So now let's look at the pros for hiring a direct sales team. First of all, I think it's very important that you choose a direct sales force if you have an early stage technology that requires some market development. In most situations, manufacturers reps don't want to take the time to build a new market versus sell a Me Too product in an existing market, because what they have, what their power is the relationship with the physician. So pro number one, you have full control over the sales process. By having control to evolve your sales process and manage the pipeline without any interference from anybody else, since you're selling directly to your customers, you get a direct line of feedback about what they like or don't like. So you have the ability then to take and adjust to those market conditions very quickly. Whereas manufacturers reps, sometimes you may not get that feedback. This also leads right into the second reason to hire a direct sales force, and that's full control over the customer experience. Also, the ability to build brand awareness is important. So those two, in a lot of ways, go hand in hand. I look at it in two ways. First, customer service. The best level of customer service at any med device company comes directly from the frontline salespeople. When you work with a distributor, you're at the mercy of those individuals and the value proposition every day. So directly working for the organization is going to give them a greater sense of mission and responsibility to do that job well. And it's really important to remember that most distributor sales reps are going to care more about their reputation than they're going to be about the product that's in their bag. And for good reason, their livelihood depends on them being able to sell that product. So they care more about them and their relationships in the market than they are going to care about your mission or your product. And then last, having control over your pricing and distribution gives you a much greater capability to verify that it's competitive. You're also going to be able to ensure individuals representing your products are knowledgeable and effective at the value proposition. And this piece is so important, such an important part of the business. I've spent the last 7 years focusing very hard on ensuring that my value proposition matches my price. In the last 6 years, we've gone from nothing to a market leader, and we're the most expensive device available. Granted, we have the greatest clinical value, but it can be tough when you are the most expensive. Next slide. Okay, so now a few of the cons to hiring a direct sales team. I think most obvious is the higher cost. A company is responsible for everything from the hiring process to installing a CRM platform, which is really your ability to build and quote and to drive a pipeline of sales. So those are very expensive upfront costs. Scaling a sales team requires recruiting, training, onboarding the new sales reps. And in many instances, the compensation will be more expensive per product sold because the distributor because the overhead on a direct sales team is the major difference. And at the end of the day, control costs money. So if that's what you're looking for, if that's your main goal, then it's worth the investment. Number two, it takes a while for people to learn and understand the product pitch. The sales process and the company strategy also take time. So it's harder to scale when you own the entire process. The company is responsible for all the hiring, marketing, research, feedback, customer service. I mean, the list go on, and it's harder to enter new markets and reach new customers compared to those distribution channel sales, which many of may have partners already in those spaces. And finally, the breadth of the market reach. So your ability to be targeted to market becomes dependent on the ability and speed that you can recruit in those expansion markets. As you start to become successful selling in a certain market and you want to move into the next large city, that the speed at which you can do that is going to be dependent on how fast you can hire. And in the beginning, it's absolutely expected that you cherry pick your targeted customers, but shortly thereafter, you need to kind of spread to the markets that are unpenetrated, and that can become very time consuming. Next slide, please. Okay, so based on my experience, more often than not, you want to look at a direct sales force. So what's the first thing you do when you want to hire a sales force? And my answer to that would be to hire your sales leader. This is by far one of the most important decisions you're going to make, because that person will shape not only the sales process, but the culture of your team that is front facing to your customers. I've lived in the world of jack of all trades for quite a while, meaning in a lean startup organization, your leaders have to take on many roles. And some of those roles are strategic, and some of those roles are very tactical. In the US, we would say something like, are you ready to roll your sleeves up and get dirty in an interview? We need to know that people aren't just delegators, that they're also ones that will be a player coach. Are they willing to do the grunt work while also building that model, that sustainable model that you need? Most of these folks are relentless about the power of a pipeline and know the details like the back of their hand. They embrace being on the front lines with the customers. They're very customer front facing, and they always want to see a deal get across the finish line. And if you're looking at someone who's never had experience as a player coach, I think you're taking a pretty big risk on whether or not they're willing to get their hands dirty. And identifying those sales leaders, there are a few things I usually think about in order to kind of make sure that I find that person. First, you're looking for that leader who could manage a deal, manage a process, manage the company, and then manage the culture. It's kind of the 4 buckets that I always believe a good sales leader needs to be able to manage. And you want somebody who's been proven as a salesperson, somebody who has experience building a sales process, and then somebody who's either built a sales team in a culture or somebody who has lived within a culture that you're familiar with. You know that that organization or the highest leadership in that organization builds a good culture, so you know what you're getting when you hire that person. You're also looking for somebody who's well connected, because this sales leader is going to be your main recruiter for all of your salespeople, especially for the starting group of salespeople. And good leaders always have friends, people that they keep in mind for positions and jobs when they make a change. And this quality will allow you to speed up the time that it takes to build that sales force, because recruiting can sometimes be the longest component of that. And last, you're looking for a person who has the skill set and the experience to build your first go-to-market strategy. So in a way, you have a marketer, and that's going to include messaging, that's going to include marketing collaterals. Sometimes you don't always have the resources to hire your marketing leader right away. So in a lot of ways, that can be this person, and that can be your VP of sales, or it can be a combination of your VP of sales and the CEO. But this is the person who usually is going to build that first go-to-market strategy with the company owners and the company leaders. Next slide, Hannah. Okay, so team structure. Let's talk about the structure a little bit as part of the sales team. I'll harp on this for as long as I'm a sales leader, leading any sales organization. And that is, you need people who are willing to do more than one job when you're starting out. I beg you to not overhire. There are many, many examples out there of startup companies that have hired way too many salespeople, frontline managers from the very beginning. And I just don't think that's the correct approach. Focusing on a small tiger team, you have a veteran sales rep and at least one high-level clinical sales specialist. That high-level clinical sales specialist is somebody who has been in your medical space for a period of time and understands the disease state as deep as a physician would. Because in many ways, you will partner this person with the first sales reps when they are going to sell to key opinion leaders. And that's your basis for building your sales organization out, is starting with those big systems with the key opinion leaders. And you need to have the sales acumen, but also the clinical acumen in front of those key targets. Being very targeted about where you hire these reps is important as well. You want to think about population density, locations of particular KOLs. You want to cherry pick those institutions, pick the ones that you think are the most prevalent in your space, and where it makes sense for your product. And then last, you need to consider how important it is to have frontline clinicals that would team up with each of the sales reps. So does your product require an individual to be present in an OR or a cath lab? Does it need to be there for an implant? Does your product require bedside patient management? If this is the case, then you want to strongly consider teaming a clinical up with your salesperson. In a lot of ways, the salesperson goes and sells, closes the deal, and moves on to the next. The clinical is there to kind of continue to harvest that account and drive business there. We usually call this what I like to call a pod structure. This came from companies that I've been with in the past, where Gilad was a part of, and both of these individuals will have a different skill set, but they'll be responsible for the same quota and KPIs. Next slide. Okay, targeted profile of a sales team. So now what do we look for in that salesperson? And this is probably the most interesting learning that I've had over the 6 years in this role. Your profile is going to change over time. But what I can say is the first profile of sales rep that you're hiring needs to have the connections, needs to have, if you're old enough, the Rolodex, needs to have the relationships and physician champions at hospitals that ultimately can make decisions and move the health system in a certain direction. And these reps can be more expensive than others, and they're well worth it. But you have to know that going in when you're going to set up a comp plan for them. In the beginning stage of building a sales team and launching a new product, you need somebody who has this experience. One way to divide sales reps up when recruiting is to understand, are they missionary or are they mercenary? And it's important to have a combination of both of these in your sales organization. Your mercenaries are going to be sales reps who may bounce from job to job on a resume every 5 years or so. And it's tricky because, you know, if you see somebody jumping every 2 years, I can tell you that most certainly those folks are not successful. They haven't been able to come out of a second year and continue to drive business. So that can be difficult to find somebody who has that kind of 5-year jump. What they're doing is they're jumping from wave to wave. They see an opportunity with a up and coming product and they make a ton of money for a couple of years, and then they go find that next wave. Missionaries can be exceptional salespeople too, but they're focused on the why. And why do I sell what I sell? Who am I helping? These types of salespeople are the ones who convey the passion, the commitment to the customer that is absolutely needed when building a brand. And I should say that mercenaries, you know, they're fine in your organization, but at some point, sometimes they can become a bit toxic because they don't want to follow the status quo of how you're running your business. Sometimes they want to kind of deviate and go on their own and do what they think is best. So that's a performance management as you kind of go through those first few years. Next slide. Okay. So we got a couple slides left. I took a stab at titling this slide. You know, listen, if first million isn't enough, because obviously it's going to depend on a selling price of your product. If you're selling a $50,000 piece of equipment, maybe, you know, getting to your first million is a little easier than something smaller. But you have to start by establishing where your key opinion leaders are in the marketplace and going to support the clinical value of your product next. You want to target those accounts that are using the DRG or the CPT codes. So those reimbursement codes that are connected to your product reimbursement. And interestingly enough, the key opinion leaders are sometimes in a very different hospital than the key institutions you're going to use to focus on science and business. Now, accessing these important key opinion leaders and key institutions can be targeted using a lot of public information in the US that come from CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare Services. This is the government reimbursement for US citizens over the age of 65. So this is data that can tell you what physicians and hospital systems use the codes that are associated with your product the most. This data can also tell you physicians and hospital systems that may be using a product or a service that's related to what you want to offer. An example of this is if you have a product, let's say that is a therapy product for atrial fibrillation, which is arrhythmia of the heart. It may make sense to find doctors who prescribe therapy drugs for that same disease state, because you know that they have many of those patients. So that could be a very important target. Unfortunately, this data can be pretty difficult to analyze from the public resources that are given. So there's a bunch of different organizations in the US that take this data and organize it into a digital platform. And then they'll also purchase third-party data that is more reimbursement data that are for patients that are under the age of 65. So in a way, they're gathering all of this information and then turning that data into useful targeting information for a company. So there's several of those companies in the US, and it would be my recommendation that you would look at utilizing one of them to help you target where your sales team goes. Next slide. So this is really, I think it's important that once you start to get towards that first KPI, that first goal of top line sales, that you understand the analytics around it, and that you know that every rep that I add moving forward is going to bring me a certain amount of revenue. So it allows for that 1 to 3 year forecasting. And there's going to be a point in time when your veteran salespeople have given you enough historical information and data to show what does a sales rep that I bring in, what can I expect them to bring me in new business for the first 6 months, the first 12 months, and the first 18 months. And then as you start to strategically build your sales team, you use that as one of your key indicators for how many sales reps you want and what your top line revenue target should be. Okay, last slide. And this one is near and dear to my heart. It's obviously near and dear to my heart because I'm a VP of sales, and the two most important jobs that I have are to hire people, good people, and to motivate those people. So for me to hire, I have to be competitive with my compensation. And for me to motivate, my compensation plan has to match with the strategy that I have. And there's a couple of things that I think are really important when it comes to US salespeople. I would always want you to remember that from my perspective, a salesperson is not only in it for the money. Many people think that that is the easiest judgment somebody can make on a salesperson. Yes, money matters, but what they are out for is to win. If they're with a company where they're making a lot of money and they're not winning, I can tell you they're going to be unhappy. So with that being said, the number one rule is don't be penny wise and pound foolish when it comes to compensation. Be smart about that. The little perks in the US matter. And I'll give you it's a silly example, but hopefully it gives you an understanding of what I mean by small perks. In the US, almost all sales companies give a car allowance to their sales reps. Car allowances or company cars are standard. The choice of the car is something that to so many sound trivial and quite frankly silly, but to salespeople, they live in their cars. And it's a very important component of their day-to-day life. So it matters what kind of car they get. So that sounds simple and silly and trivial, but all of those types of things, those small perks get added up when recruiting. And so when they look at the whole list of things and the type of product that they're going to be selling and the compensation and the perks, all of that comes into their decision to come with you to your company. So I would build a compensation plan that rewards over achievement and not the maintenance of your business. And what I mean by that is when you put a quota together in front of a salesperson, I want them focused on the growth side. So a very typical plan is to drive growth is to not pay a commission on revenue up to a certain target or a gate. And a lot of times that's, let's say 50% of your quota. We give you a salary to make that money for us. Everything above that, we're going to pay you on. And then anything above the target revenue, we're going to pay you a substantial overachievement. So you are really driving those sales reps to overachieve and to go and grow your business versus just maintain it. And last, be willing to bend and always do it right for a sales rep. One of the biggest learnings I've had over the last probably 12 or 13 years, especially new businesses, is unplanned opportunities can come up and happen with a sales rep. And you need to make sure as a leader that you reward those salespeople for taking advantage of those opportunities. Otherwise, they'll ignore them and they'll just stay focused on whatever is on paper that they're going to get paid for. So always think of do the right thing for the salesperson, do the right thing for your organization. If they drove business, they should be compensated for it. And yeah, so that's the presentation. And it's kind of funny how the sales leader ends with compensation, but that's where I'm going to close the session. And I think we have 15 minutes to open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, Jeff, you can take a quick look at the chat. We've had few questions that we answered, but other than that, of course, we're happy to answer other questions either on the chat or in person. So the next question for you, Jeff, is site selection, KOLs versus high volume sites.
Ooh, you need them both. I personally believe that if you have a new product, something that you are market developing, you need a KOL. You need somebody that's going to be on podium, that is going to have the dialogue, have the conversation, and build a reputation behind that approach to a disease state. It, to me, is the anchor for anything you do in building your revenue in the future. So to me, it's 1A and 1B, but I would probably take the KOL as the most important out of the gate. And then you can really target those high-level institutions. As I said, though, remember, they aren't always the same, right? KOLs sometimes live in academic centers, and they're not always going to be commercial users to the degree you would want them to be, but they can be your voice.
Right. And I want to give another very, I think, interesting example, Jeff, that we've experienced. Sometime when your product is not creating a space, is not a new procedure, but it's a fast follower or a second or third to market, actually going to the KOLs can hurt you. So what happened to us, Medtronic launched a new product for ablation of AFib that use cryo technology in a balloon. And they very wisely, they specifically went to the secondary and tertiary centers, not to get the KOLs to resist their particular technology in day one. They actually avoided the KOLs for about 2-3 years until they established themselves as a third player. And that's one of the best case studies of what you do when you're third or fourth to market and ignoring the KOLs that will kill you day one because it's not what they used to. So you need the people that are open-minded or suffer and their skill set from the existing technology. Next question for you, Jeff. If you are looking at a hybrid model between direct and indirect sales, can you provide an estimate of the number of personnel for the initial direct team?
So VP of sales, and then, some of it depends on the product and how saturated a market might be with that type of technology. If it's a brand new technology, I would focus in on the larger population dense cities and focus it on a side of the US that can be regionally reached, right? I don't see value in going to New York and LA and nothing in between. That to me doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you're building that first organization from a direct sales perspective, have them spaced out so that if you do also go indirect, that you have locations of your own team that can then connect with those indirects. So you may want to take 4, let's say, and go East, Midwest, Central, and West. So then as you're scaling, you can build that indirect sales team, but you also have your own sales team within those geographies to kind of manage and to observe and make sure that those indirect sales folks are working, to meet your needs.
Right. I would add that in general, the big watch out in distribution channels is channel conflict. One of the worst thing is 2 different reps from 2 different organizations, either you're and a distributor or 2 distributors are calling on the same person. That's nothing good happens when you have a channel conflict. So in general, avoid channel conflict. And if you need to do 2, like in early stage, I would do support direct, means clinical, high-level clinicals, marketing, market communication, and education. I will keep in-house direct and let the sales be indirect to avoid channel conflict. In general, that will be my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Next question. Can you address direct versus agent versus distributor versus partner and profit margins in these different models? Jeff, you take the first, I'll take the margins.
Yeah, because terms can be different in different places. I think all wants to know profit margins on each of those versus what the definitions are, correct? I think that's how I'm reading that.
I think that's just a way of so the first question is, I think I know Gal by now. He said, what's the pros and cons of direct versus agent versus distributor versus partner? What's the big differences? I think that might be a long answer, but you can try, and then I'll talk about the margins.
Direct versus agent. Honestly, I wish I could answer that. I don't know what you would mean by agent. That terminology I'm not familiar with in the commercial space.
The difference between an agent and a direct is your own employee. An agent is like a consultant that you take. It's not on your overhead. It's a consultant that you take that works for you. And the difference between a distributor and a partner is the distributor usually has a limited geography, and a partner covers practically, it's like a big company. They cover all the territories. So you're not working with different distributors for the Midwest, Northeast, and things of that nature.
Well, Gal, I'll humbly thank you for answering your own question.
No, but my question was not really what is the definition. I think we talked about direct and about distributors, but there's also two other models of agents and partners, and I just wanted you to comment on that.
That's
because we had experience working, with partners and.
Yeah, I mean, I've used both. I think 1099s are usually, or 1099s or those types of agents are going to be a little bit more complicated to control. I think everything falls into the control realm, right? It's how much can I control and how much can I not control? And do I want to put a person into a position of power in my messaging to the marketplace that can put me at a disadvantage? So to me, it's important on who those folks will be in front of, what their job responsibilities are matter. So you want to limit your liability in a way when you have those agents. As a consultant, I've been a consultant in a lot of those situations. There's a balance in the act between how much power you're going to give that person to make decisions versus them bringing back the information and being the category expert for you. So to me, though, that's the big difference between an agent versus direct, I think, is control.
Yeah, so one of the European way of thinking about it is that distributor actually buys the product from you, warehouse it, and resell it to the end users. Agents representing you and get a commission. So that's the legal definition of the difference. And a lot of public company like the agent model because they keep the entire top line in their P&L versus distributor, they just get the transfer price. So that's one thing. And another thing is just the responsibility for the quality system. Agent is not responsible for the quality system. You have to have your own, while distributor have their own quality system with complaint handling and customer service in the legal thought of it, not just the service thought of it. So few consideration. GP, gross margins. Let's talk about gross margins. General medical device aim is at 80% gross margins from the get-go. I mean, you start with lower when the volumes are lower, but you plan and design the product for roughly 80% gross margins to survive a manufactured medical device. And then if you do direct sales only, it's very typical to have a P&L like sales is 100%, of course, gross margin at 80%. Then you have about 30% sales and marketing to 40%. And then you go down the P&L line all the way to the bottom, and then you lose money anyway in the beginning. So don't worry about it too much. And then if you use a distributor, they will not wake up in the morning for anything less than 25 to 35%. So that's your P&L looks like. Final end user sale is 100%. You only get to start at 65%, 65 to 70, because the rest goes to the distributor, right? And then you have to start counting down, but then you don't have the sales and marketing 30%. So it's somehow P&L wise, it's balances in between. And as Jeff said, a lot of time direct sales force is actually more expensive because you have all these support functions that you cannot leverage from other products and lower the overhead. Oh, we got a lot of questions. Let's see what we got. Pricing strategy. Can you change the price? Jeff, you're an expert.
Yeah, so I think holding tight on your price is important for a couple of reasons. One, reimbursement is directly reflective of your price in the marketplace. So every time you drop your price, CMS, Medicare is going to take a look at that price in the marketplace and drop your reimbursement accordingly. So you think you might be winning on the top line, but at the end of the day, reimbursement is going to end up being your enemy. I also believe that it's more about the value proposition. Like I said, we grew from virtually nothing to the market leader, and we were the most expensive device in the market. And every week I had sales reps fighting me on price. And I said, we're not gonna back off on price. Our value proposition warrants that price. And instead of dropping the price, I'm gonna help you do a better job of selling the value.
Yes, some general rules on pricing in medtech. General rule in medtech says that you should price your device roughly, if you're first to market and you're market leader, roughly anywhere between a third to half of the reimbursement of the technical fee. That's rule number one. If you're taking 75% of the technical fee, you're overcharging and your penetration will be small. And if you take 10% of the technical fee, you're leaving money on the table. So that's in general. Now that's if you're first to market. If you're second or third to market, fast follower, there are different pricing rules we can talk about. That's the first thing. Second, it's always easy to drop a price and it's always difficult to increase the price unless you come with new features, new layers of value proposition, or new business model that allow price flexibility. But taking exactly the same thing and drop the price and then bring it up, it's good luck, almost impossible. So be very careful when you do that. And those are few pricing rules. We can hold a whole session on pricing signaling, pricing. We can do it in 45 minutes, but those are kind of the 1 minute answers. Jeff, next. Yep. If it's a new product and business development is required to distribute, I assume we likely need more than 35% margins. If early stage, you may need to sacrifice your margins to buy initial. Yes, that's what I said. Early stage, bottom line. Yep. A nice P&L start with 80% gross margins, but then your sales and marketing expense in the first, I would say, $15 million of sales in medtech, you're not going to keep. You're going to burn the entire 15 and then more on even before you go R&D, just because the reps are not optimized. So let's talk about a rep. Almost no matter what space you look at, typical medtech rep generate between $1 and $2 million. That's if it doesn't matter what space you look. Pacemaker, defibrillators, stents, sutures, no matter where I look, it's between $1 and $2 million in top line revenue. That's typical rep. Now, in day one, when you hire them, they're not bringing $1 to $2 million. They're bringing $250,000. So you fund that growth and learning for about half a year to a year. And in year two, in Itamar, in Itamar, we developed a model that year one, they brought $300,000. In year two, they brought $750. In year three, they passed $1 million. And then some of them grew to 2 million. And then we had to split the territory because it became too big. Biosense was not that far from that either. So you fund that first 2 years of learning, and then you got to retain them too.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's a question about technical fees. So in the US, a reimbursement is broken out into technical and professional. So the professional goes to the physician, technical goes to the office or where that procedure was done.
I think we just got to the top of the hour. We have more time, or no? We're concluded. Jeff, I want to thank you all-heartedly for participating.
Thank you.
To everybody, we are here at MCI. If you need a consultation, definitely if you're a graduate company of MCI, we always at your service. And if you're considering to become an MCI graduate, we will happy to help too. So Jeff, thank you so much. Hannah, thank you for organizing everything.
Thank you, everyone.
Participant, thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.